I'm a hard work driven, but marketing enthusiast, I guess you could say, because I've only been in the business for 7 years. Doesn't mean I don't have the experience. Someone who's been in it for 20. The one thing I would thought when I first started, everyone knows hard work pays off, right? But someone that's been in the business for even 1 year, or someone that's been in the business for 5 and has done 15 transactions, the person who's only been in it for 1 that's done more transactions. So that's the only way to learn, essentially.
Okay, how are you? Today I'm not
Great.
at the lake. Shamelessly promoting my restaurant right here, My Thai Bistro.
Is that in Rochester? Or
It
Dover?
is. It is. And nothing like my favorite, crab rangoon. Love it. Anyway, so you and I started, I don't know if you started in the Seacoast. I started in the Seacoast at another company and then went to the Lakes region and then went back down to the Bean Group in the Seacoast. Where's your location now? Okay, so I was in Northwood. So which was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, right? So what got you into real estate?
So I wanted something that just helped people create a certain life at the same time. Growing up in Bay, it was a smaller market that's up and coming now. But when I would just drive by and see a sign, I'd always look up the property. And I just thought to myself, oh, I wonder what this would be like. And when I took the real estate it's something that completely caught my interest. My first listing was actually on the lake. It was rebuilt in 2018, and it was off to the races.
Okay. Now, do you have a microphone or are you using your Mac?
My Mac.
Your Mac, okay. Yeah, because it's going in and out, but that's okay. I like the fact that you're a Mac guy. When I started, nobody was. But of course, I was in advertising in New York and a designer, so you have to have a Mac.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now I believe that we are all a product of our past. And so what did you do in the past prior to real estate? And
Honestly,
don't say cut lawns and painted houses, right?
So when I started, I was only 19 years old.
Oh, wow.
It was a couple of years right out of high school, and I was just trying to get started on a certain career that could take me places that I wanted to be, right? And once I turned 20, that was when I got my first listing. And I remember the closing agent was like, don't spend that check on place. And it was almost like just going through the transaction. It wasn't a paycheck at that point. It was just how much I lived. I just want to keep on going.
So you started right after high school?
Correct. Yep.
Wow. That's good. I
Absolutely.
think that what I find satisfying is to help first-time buyers, because you were probably a first-time buyer at least soon after that. Or were you still living at your parents' house?
I was still living.
Did you sell them their house?
Not at that point. I actually sold it back in June. So that was like my first transaction of not my own, but the same thing. So what made you essentially want to prioritize Waterfront?
Yep. So how did you do that? Do you live on a lake?
I don't. So I was wondering what made you get into Waterfront.
So for me, my first listing was I lived in Manhattan for 16 years and then Boston, and I moved to this little shack in Northwood on Long Pond. That's when I discovered what seasonal meant, because I moved in January. Froze my took us off, but I was on a lake. I was still doing marketing. And then it was actually my uncle who said, maybe you should look to real estate. Now, real estate and advertising met the same criteria of what I wanted to do, which was I didn't want to be in an office doing the same thing, wanted to be meeting all kinds of people, doing something different every day. and was able to use my creative brain because I was an art director. Now, a lot of people in real estate don't have the creative brain, but that I do the marketing. So my first listing was a guy down the street. And he said he heard that I was in real estate and it was a waterfront. So I did it. Now, I've lived on water my whole life and in a different form, but I like water. I think water is a natural healer for everything. It brings nature and people together. So that started, and so I created the domain back then, and we're talking 20 years ago. You know, the whole domain name thing was big and new, and people didn't, and the internet was new, and that guys. I didn't want to be michaeltravis.com because who's Michael Travis? Actually, people might still say that. So I created waterfrontagent.net because .com wasn't available to promote my listing. I was with Cole Banker at the time, and it's a different kind of business model, and they weren't used to somebody coming in with a website. And what I created my own Apple version of a website, which meant I learned that somebody else should do it. But that was my start. And then within 3 months, people referred to me as the waterfront agent. That's just called branding. And which is fine. There would be times that people said, well, I've got a client, can you show me some waterfronts? And I would just show them mine listings. And it just built and built. Then the .com, waterfrontagent.com became available in, I think, 2013. Someone owned the domain. They wanted $20,000 for that. Now, anybody could use anywhere in the country be waterfrontagent.com, but I had built so much just with the .net. If I didn't buy it, then I would lose all my branding and marketing and that kind of stuff. So I negotiated him down to $7,000. Now that's a lot of money for a new agent because as we're paid by the hour, right? And have bonuses and pensions. And we collect up front. So I just built on it. And actually it was a website. Then I decided to go to a website called Agent Master, which coincidentally is how Michael Bean started his website. He built the whole business on his website. But when he acquired it, basically I had to go to a different company, hosting company, which right. I did, the Union Street. So I just the important thing is to just keep building in Facebook and social media. And I have fun with AI now. I've got these great little videos of like me helping a beaver build a house, or riding a moose into the pond, or selling flamingos in an ice house in Winnipesaukee. But it's all still marketing. It's still about New Hampshire, and I can tie that into it. So everything I do ties back to Waterfront Agent and that kind of stuff. And I just have fun doing it. But it starts with my family owned an island up in Canada. It was 9 miles by boat to get to, 28 miles by car to the nearest town, which was called Little Current, which was an overstatement. Our family bought all the meat in the town once. So that we would drive by in our turquoise motorhome. You could see from space, and the cows in the fields would say, "This are here."
Absolutely.
And my grandfather had a place in Lake Michigan, and then I lived in Manhattan Island, which that water you wouldn't necessarily want to go in. And then I bought this little shack in Northwood. And that just started me. I had that for 20 years. It cost less than, it was like nothing, cost nothing. And to me, New Hampshire did you grow up in New Hampshire your whole life?
Yep, I lived in for about 20 years.
Yeah, to me, New Hampshire was New Hampster or Cow Hampshire, depending if I was in Manhattan. See, in Manhattan, people go to Vermont, and then in Boston, they go to New Hampshire. So I didn't really know much about it.
Absolutely.
If you lived in Manhattan, you're 1 in a million. There's 8 people just like you, which is frightening. But especially because I have an identical twin brother, so that's 16 people just like me. So that's how I started, and I think and I was lucky because in my advertising, I did marketing for a little tiny real estate company in Boston And when I say marketing, I did the brochures and I designed them. I did the photography, I wrote, and I created these brochures. So when I decided to go into real estate, I just walked over to the call banker because I liked the listings in the window. And I showed them my brochure. I said, this is some marketing I've done. They said, you did this marketing? I said, yeah. And so they started me at a higher commission, thinking that I went to every real estate company, which I neglected to mention I didn't. It was the only door I walked in. But I had a mentor who's been in the business since 1967. So that was my fast track of learning. My first transaction was fraud. That was interesting within a big company. But my background, I'm from Michigan, lived in Manhattan and Boston, then come up here. I deal with all kinds of people, and that was another criteria of whatever I wanted to do in my life. As a little kid, what do I want to do? Dealing with different kinds of people. And boy, do you and I have stories, right?
Too many to tell.
Yes.
It was hard to at
yes.
the time.
The only time I was a victim of an assault was here in the Live Free, not in New York, not Manhattan. The ex-boyfriend of one of my clients thought I was in his house, which was weird, but that's okay. Right now I'm dealing with a lot of scams. I've got one that's going to go to the FBI right now. It's awful what's going on. Technology, we've seen technology grow and change the business. When I started, I had to buy a PC. Now, PC to me means piece of whatever. I don't use PCs. Since 1987, when I bought my Mac for $10,000, I've had one virus. The PC that I bought, because it was PC based, you had to use that to do real estate. Within 2 weeks, it was dead. Virus killed it, whatever. And then they changed to internet-based, web-based real estate, which makes all the difference. But you learn a lot, everything. So what is your favorite thing or where have you learned the most every time you meet with people? I'm talking about like inspectors or clients, or you've got lenders, you got title people.
It switches. It's just eye-opening how many people almost want your business once you get into the industry, right? It's like we're fighting for our business and then people are fighting for our business. And when I got my first Lakefront property, I didn't even know what a site assessment was. Yep. I didn't know you had to get the listing, things like that. When I first got that property in Plains, I had been on swing multiple times. I grew up playing hockey. So whether it was the summer or the winter, I was always on.
Sometimes this is Swains Lake?
Yep.
Yeah, I've sold many properties there. Yep. 405 acres, mesotrophic, things like that.
Yeah. And after that first listing, it just opened up so many because Barrington's a small town.
Yes.
So once your name out a little bit, it seems like everyone will do. So I got a call from a homeowner. It was about 5 sisters. The parent had passed away. It's what years, and they were just looking to they couldn't agree on almost whether to keep it or sell it, so they wanted me to come pitch. This was down a private dirt road, and I'll get into that. So I went there, I pitched, and I got a listing, and then two neighbors had called me as well. It's almost like right everything.
Yep.
So it was just four in a row that were Waterfront, where I got the love for selling on the water. From like the photo, the experience to the open house, it just seems like even if it's not the property, you can still sell. And when it came to how I was going to sell, I had a mentor as well, who was extremely well versed in business. But this was when COVID. So a lot of people weren't out, but a lot of people were on the internet. And being a younger person at the business, so that's where I could use my leverage. I knew that the property, most likely, unless it was an in-town buyer, wasn't going to drive, give me a call or drive down the private road and look at the property from the outside, right? So that's where a lot of, almost like learning what worked, Facebook ads, Instagram, brochures, like you said, mailers, Google ads, if I could present to the outside or anyone that was using essentially like a phone or a computer that was looking for that type of property in the area on Zillow, think it was going to pop. And I think that's just what I found out what worked.
And it changes. My advice to you using marketing, look at what you get in the mail and what you throw away immediately. In advertising with any new client, we would have to answer the question, what's in it for me? To the client. Okay. My feeling, a lot of people say, here's what I sold that will help for the neighbors. Maybe, but the neighbors will know anyway. But it's the stories behind it that make the difference. Because you are helping someone possibly make the most money they ever made selling their property. We're still not. And when it comes to marketing, I know that what works for me is I tell a story. Okay. We would call it the elevator pitch with clients in New York, but you also have real life experience. What I like to say is you add real life experience to your real estate experience, a line I use all the time. And listening. And no, sometimes they don't tell the truth, right? But you'll find out. But we're psychologists sometimes, right? Do you find that we're
absolutely
a little psychologists? And sometimes we run into situations they're trying to get as much information from you so they can sell it themselves. And I've had that happen. And I had somebody invite me to their house, to their open house, because they knew I was a real estate agent. I had sold a bunch of properties in Minden's Pond, but they wanted to sell it themselves. They became experts. And I said, do you have a lead paint disclosure? I said, no, what's that? I said, that's a $11,000 fine for each part you don't sign. I think it's $16,000. I can't remember what it is now. They had no idea. They're putting themselves at risk. And I think a lot of clients may not know that.
Yeah. I think it's like small things that the sellers write. Oh, no, I don't have a lead disclosure. I don't have a second assessment. I don't have a property. But each one of those things can knock the value in terms of an investment.
We have real life experiences. Do you find people say, I'm just going to sell it as is? That doesn't mean that someone who has an offer is going to accept as is when they do their inspections and the septic failed.
No, absolutely. And I've had a couple clients recently where like they wanted to sell it at it was going to be sold as it, and we get an offer. They wanted to accept all the terms for free, and they'd call me and be like, "Why do they want to do it sold as is?" And I explained it
because it sounds like there's something wrong or they're hiding something, right?
And it's even if it can just be for informational value, just because it's sold as is, people aren't just always going to write the contract, hand over a check, and take the key, right? There's a lot more process that some people, if they have sold a lot of their properties, don't essentially.
I had a buyer who was an appraiser. It was my listing. They were an appraiser. So they were trying to push what they thought the value was because they were appraisers. And I said, it doesn't matter what you think the appraisal is. I think it's worth more. And I sold it for $40,000 more. Happens.
Absolutely.
And my very first listing was a divorce situation. They hadn't talked to each other literally in 3 years. So what do you do about that? This is my first listing. This is my
first listing ever?
Yes. First of all, I had my daughter, who was 7, do a lemonade stand at the end of the driveway. And she said, Dad, I can't believe it. I sold 8 cups for 50 cents and I got $16. I said, okay, now I have a restaurant. You can run it. And the people who looked at it had been looking for 2.5 years and said, I want huge windows facing the lake and I want a lot of wood. I want just carpet, whatever. What'd they buy? No small windows in the lake. Carpet is all wood interior. They bought everything that they said they didn't want to. but it was the 25th house they looked at that year. And so after 2.5 years, and then they came 5 times, spent 2 hours at every showing. So then I told them I was charging them for showing. And then the last showing was the loon was at the end of the dock. The sun was coming down. The neighbor kayaked by. I mean, that takes a lot to arrange. And then I said, look, the good news is that this is a great house. The bad news might be that I'm your next door neighbor, 2 doors down. They became best friends.
That's awesome.
And then across the street, my second listing, which was the week after, and actually these buyers, again, the buyers, they said, how long have you been in the business? I said, I'll tell you at the closing. It was 7 days. I didn't need them to know. And the seller, it was a situation, they had literally not talked to each other in 2 years. So I figured, okay, let's do the closing at the Brentwood, where there's lots of police. So if there was a problem, I'm surrounded. So those are the things those are just like stories that happen. You just look at your gut and you don't go in like a real estate agent that's just waiting for the closing, that kind of stuff. Because I think if people feel like you're a real estate agent, then you could turn some people off, right?
No,
I have a business card, and I suggest you even look at doing this. I have my business card that has all my information, but I also have a business card because I went to a party, some very high net people. And I had a business card that was very simple. It had my name, my website, my phone number, and that's it. Because I didn't want it to look like a real estate card. But because I have my website, they go to the website, they know that I'm a real estate agent. But they knew anyway. But that way I was passing out like it looked like a personal card. So sometimes that's nice to do because I always run out of my business card. I don't, it's like, where is it? I think, what's wrong with you?
You're like, I got to order more.
Yeah, it's in the mail. Of course, that's one of the 3 lies, right? So, but you're a very personable person, I can see.
Absolutely.
And so as long as, I'm sure you've run into agents who just act like agents and they forget what the stereotype of an agent, and people forget. They may think. Now, and my other advice to people is that because I do a lot of waterfronts, I deal with a lot of very high net people. And I've seen agents who are very intimidated by that. But the best thing I learned in advertising is I did a commercial with President Bush and a bunch of celebrities, and I discovered they're actually human. Some are. But
you just can't change who you are depending on how less a client has.
It doesn't matter. That's not going to change if they're going to like you or not. And so as long as you're yourself, here's the thing. If anybody tries to act like somebody else, then they're not being themselves. And people know that.
Absolutely.
And given that, like, how long have you been in the business?
7 years.
7 years. Okay. You got the itch yet? So you've come in at an interesting time. I started, and then 2008 happened. It was horrible. Again, I had a mentor who put me through it, who's been through several recessions and knows people. That's someone in Portsmouth, Kathy Youngs, who I have the highest regard for in the world. And that helps, that makes a difference when you have people that can be your mentor. I'm not talking partner, because that's a different story. There's a lot of people who have asked me to be their partner, and how does that work? Partnerships are very difficult, but having a team of coworkers that work with you is wonderful. And that's how I started. It was like this group of people that I could rely on for everything. And we all became good friends, but we weren't. And when you can be that, but don't feel like you're competing, which creates a toxic environment, you just learn from each other. Now I get referrals from agents from other companies. And that's the one thing I have on my thing is our success depends on each other. And I believe that in anything we do.
It's definitely a team.
It is a team thing. And because we're psychologists, sometimes I don't know if you've dealt with situations where it's a divorce situation and there's a lot of animosity and sometimes very weird things and you don't know who to believe, but you just have to look, the two of you have to work with each other. And because the goal is to move on, be able to move on. I had one client come into the closing and tell the title person, you have to write 2 checks because my husband beats me. It's okay. That's a nice thing to find out.
Oh my God. When I first saw that divorce scenario, I actually went up to Lake Winnipesaukee, and it was supposed to be a listing appointment with the ex-husband and the wife, right? And it was what? And reschedule, went down that pit, and she had a little longer conversation I would have liked with her. And I was like, here, I'll send you over the listing and property disclosure. You guys can look over it, talk about what we talked about. I'd like to speak with him as well, but I'd feel more all together, right? When I sent it over to her, I got them back by both people, but I had not talked to the husband yet. So I called the wife and I'm like, did he agree? Was he able to sign? Like I had said to you, I wanted to, or I did want him, we were on the same page. We knew what the goal was and we knew how we were going to get there from the start. And he goes, I said for him. And that was a red flag.
Yeah, so one of my first listings is a divorce. Again, it was a divorce situation. The wife's, the agreement with whatever their deal was, is that she just was going to get $40,000. So she didn't care if the house sold for $50,000. She would get $40,000. And I had to meet with her down in Massachusetts because she had to also sign the listing agreement. And it was, but I could feel like, look, I know I've been divorced. I know all conflicts, war, divorces is when one person is trying to convince the other person that they're right. And if you know that in advance, then you compare yourself to what they're saying or what they're needing and what their motivation is. In this case, she wanted it to sell so fast. Again, it was a waterfront worth $500 and something thousand. And in that case, they had another problem. The next door neighbor bought it directly, except the owner actually wasn't allowed to sell it. They had to, because there was a divorce situation, have to have a real estate agent. So my first job was to unsell it to the buyer, who was also my neighbor, who had sold their house to somebody else as well in order to buy this house. But the thing is, I say this house because I obviously had so much experience, like a week. And I said, well, this house is worth much more than that. And so I actually got the seller $80,000 more than he was willing to sell it to the next door neighbor, who was my neighbor too. And wow. So it's like there was a lot of moving parts there. But you have to kind of manage all of that stuff. And the more you do it, and again, I had a mentor who's seen everything in the world, guns, people, whatever. But I find that kind of a nice challenge. If you were at IBM, you wouldn't get to have that fun. Now, I like to tell, have you run into any scams, direct scams? Yeah.
I ran into just one, thankfully, and it was almost like a generic short version finance letter. And when I first looked at it, it seemed like something was up. And I called Jameson Dustin, who's a well-versed listing agent.
I know him very well.
And he asked to see it. So I sent it over to him, and that's when he gave me the heads up. I tried all the boxes, and from that moment, I ever talked to him again. And about 2 hours later, I got an email from the board saying I'm alert with that information on it.
Oh.
So I knew from that point on, it's not even about being careful, but taking the time to make sure that people are approved or have the fun without getting involved in the fraud situation. And sometimes it's hard with artificial intelligence now, and GPT, all these different things, on top of people being a little bit intelligent when it comes to those things, because they can look real, but they're remotely completely off.
Again, I've got this current situation where I knew it was fraud because he had the wrong address of where he lived, and the tax card is correct because the town always needs to send a check, a bill to that person. In this case, I didn't have his phone number, couldn't find it, whatever. But I drove to his house and I said, and I asked this person to give me a copy of their driver's license. And I said, this guy who doesn't look like you is claiming to be you. Is this you? And he didn't know who I was. Who are you? And he thought I was a scam. And then I said, I'm just telling you that somebody's probably just stolen your identity, and you just need, and it was actively going on as we speak. And so he called people in town and they verified me immediately. But in that case, I'm stopping something from happening. I don't even know the end game, how they think they're getting their money, but that's besides the point. But by taking that extra step, I help somebody, which I get personal satisfaction to know that fraud is happening as we speak. And also, I don't know if there's a deed fraud alert thing that now all the registries sign up, you can put your name in it. And so if anybody pulls your deed for any reason, you get notified.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which is great.
It's almost like a personal, like when you showed up to push back a little bit, the frustration. And even though it's not your fault, you're in front of it.
Yeah.
Or their help when everything starts to calm down and they start understanding what you're saying and the knowledge comes into play. That's when they start to appreciate exactly what you're doing.
But the other thing, we're learning from them anyway, because we're not perfect, right? Except me, but we're not perfect. And as long as you keep learning, that's okay. And acknowledging what you don't know. When somebody asks a question, you just make up an answer. I was in advertising. I was paid to make up answers, but and destroy the English language. But people respect when you say, I don't know, I'll find out. Because that makes you real, right? You're not somebody who's pretending I know everything, because people know that you don't know anything. Because you can see that in somebody, right? So if you can see it in somebody, most likely your clients at your meeting will see it in you if that's who you are. But it's a fun thing. Now, so tell me something that you want everyone to know about you.
So one thing,
or just between you and I won't tell anybody. I'm sure the record button's not on.
I'm hard work driven, but marketing enthusiast, I guess you could say, because I've only been in the business for 7 years. Doesn't mean I don't have the experience. Someone who's been in it for 20. The one thing I was taught when I first started, of course, everyone knows hard work pays off, right? But someone that's been in the business for even 1 year, but did 20 transactions, or someone that's been in the business for 5 and has done 15 transactions, the person who's only been in it for 1, that's done more transactions. Because that's the only way to learn, essentially. You can go to the class and talk to people, but as you go through transactions, that's how you start to gain traction and more knowledge.
I did a postcard when I first started that said, Michael Travis knows Northwood like the back of his yard. And I had a picture of my daughter on my lake. And then I sent it to everybody who didn't live in Northwood that had a property there, meaning mostly whatever. But the important thing is the message was a story. You might see me at Johnson's. You might have seen me over at the hardware store getting... That lasted for 5 years. People had it on their thing. And in my first year, I sold 35% of all listings in Northwood, and I started in May. And I didn't work in the 4 real estate companies in Northwood. But again, this is a story. You have a story, and it keeps getting better. Hopefully it gets better.
The story's not over.
The story's not over when it is. You can't tell it anyway. But then somebody else can. It'll be a memoir. But we all have our stories, and they keep getting better. And my daughter knows all my stories. No, she doesn't. She doesn't know all of them, but there's a reason she's not in real estate. It's because of my stories.
I remember I texted a good friend of mine, potential buyer coming up soon, and I let him know I was going to be on this real estate podcast.
Yeah.
And he's, you going to tell any of your stories? Like, which ones? And he told me a couple, but
he reminded you of the stories that you forgot, right?
Exactly. He goes, I think I know more stories than you remember.
So which ones? Come on. I'll tell you stories. I told my stories. I'll tell you stories. We got stories. We can have story time.
Story time. So that buyer, that was the fraud. That was a bigger one. And I think one of the biggest ones was I was at Adams Pond, and I went in to have a meeting, and she only said you only had 45 minutes. You know, that scenario. So we sat down, and we just kept on talking. But I don't think she wanted to not interrupt or be rude and kind of step away from the meeting at that one time. So she ended up using bathroom at the table.
Using what?
Went into the bathroom at the table by accident because she wanted to get the meeting over within 45 minutes, didn't want to step away. And when she stood up and apologized, I couldn't believe it.
Wow. As I say, shit happens. But anyway, so that doesn't happen every day. Well, that's where you make your connections, you know, when you first meet somebody. And so there was a listing, huge listing to come up. And it was going to be, at the time, the most expensive Lake Winnipesaukee property ever. But it was a big job, so it was not going to be listed under my name, somebody else. But of course, I was doing all the marketing for it as well. And so to pitch it, I said, look, can I have some time to just take a bunch of photos? I took 250 photos and created a video using photos and a story using the video. And I created a 28-page hardcover book for the presentation. And it had the stories, and it was like, I listened to them just a little bit, and they cried because it was very emotional. Like I'm selling their life. But we got the listing. It was at the time $16-something million, whatever. And he was like a big time executive. And it was a 23,000 square foot house. And I remember he was working in there and in his office, which was huge, bigger than my house. And I clicked this light switch in the bedroom, and it turned every single light off in the entire house. But you couldn't turn it back on. You then had to go and turn all the lights back on. It was a kill switch over the entire building. But then I did a video where I put the architect and the builder together for the first time to talk about the project, because it was an engineering phenomenon. And so I did a video from their perspective. And that gave the house a history. And so it was a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun doing that. And I like historical buildings. I have a listing for the Miss Wakefield Diner. I think you should you should have a buyer for that. I'd appreciate that. It would be really helpful. Could make this podcast short. It's an icon, so I tell the story. But I tell the story about the history of the diner. And in fact, I created a domain called iconicdiner.com, because that's part of the marketing idea of creating. It used to be you just do the address, but it doesn't do enough, which means the next diner, I can still use the domain. So it's like, I'll be the diner man.
The diner man.
But I think it's our stories, and I think it seems like you enjoy what you're doing, as challenging as it might be.
Before we close up, one that just came by, when I went to property on Plains. I was only 15 at the time, so I didn't have to pay there, nothing. And I did look. I remember the buyer's father came with I was during the walkthrough, and by the light, just getting everything ready. And I walked out to, I knew the buyer, and introduced myself to the father. Goes, "Are you so and so son? Are you son?" Like, thought I was a child of the owner of the property.
Oh,
And I said, "No, sir, I'm the realtor." And his face, I wish I could put a wall frame of it.
So-
I laughed at them. It wasn't about being embarrassing. It was almost like a proud moment.
so when I started, I thought you had to have a jacket. I was an art director in New York, and art directors, you could get, I had business clients, and I could be the funky guy because I was the art director. Had a ponytail until I looked like my sister, and I said, that's done with. But so I figured, geez, I got to wear a jacket, and I didn't have any money. I went to the Goodwill, and I bought this Armani jacket, which said for $40. And I said, well, it seems like all the jackets here are like more like $19. And it had a tag that said $475 on it. And they said, yeah, you're right. So I got it for $20. And, and I got another jacket for $2, a really nice jacket.
Like a suit coat.
Yeah, it was, I mean, but it was more like a sport coat, but it was still, so I had all these clothes, and then I realized that's not who I am. But what part I am was I got a $2 jacket and I could wear it. I got it. It was worth it. So it's like all $2. It was worth it.
You're the only one that knew.
That's right. But you don't know until you try. I did the same thing when I went into New York City from Michigan, school in Ohio, into advertising, and I thought I needed a 3-piece suit. I walk in and it says, you're not an account exec. Get that freaking, first of all, the vest. No art director wears a vest, or if they wear a vest, it's the only thing they wear. And it was a pinstripe suit. And they said, you look like an idiot. You're not you're like, just take all that off. That was the last time I wore a suit in advertising. But again, I'm not a suit guy. I can dress up. I do have a tux if I need it, but that's not who I am every day. And it doesn't make me comfortable if I'm not comfortable. So
You just feel a little bit off.
A little off, but it also might even come off as pretentious for me. I think that's how I feel. So now, is there any other proud moments that you have in terms of a transaction?
I don't think it was the one or any of them so far. I think it was just, I was like the number one waterfront agent in Barrington in 2018. It was like the second year I started, 17. And it wasn't a huge deal to everyone else, but being from Barrington and going to a business dominated by people a lot older than me, where there was a lot of proving myself. It wasn't just the potential clients I've had. It was to the agent, to the sellers, to the home inspector, to the loan officer, everyone involved. I had to show I belong. And after a little while, confidence up a little bit, and everything will flow and follow.
Have you seen the difference of sellers on Mendham's Pond versus Swain's?
Mendham's, it's like a hidden gem.
It is.
It's beautiful for fishing.
Yep.
The couple that I sold, they're right across from the, like where UNH have their accessibility, but on the other side of the lake. So we'll never be able to get built on.
It's 52% conservation. Yep. And do you get the question, what's the difference between a pond and a lake? All the time? So
all the time.
I want to know, what's your answer to that? I have my answer. I want to know what your answer is. You can use my answer after this.
Go for it.
The spelling. That's the difference. Because you look at Harvey Lake, Mendham's Pond. What feels more like a lake and what feels more like a pond?
The name, right?
I've sold, there's 11 long ponds in New Hampshire. I've sold 3 of them. But that's, yeah, number question. Now, do you get, I need to be facing west.
I actually haven't done.
Okay, I'll give you an answer for that. If you face west, that's where the weather comes from. You won't have a sandy beach. It's just between
Do you ever get the?
It's just between you and I. We don't have to tell anybody.
Do you ever run into where a potential client or a client you already have right now wants your opinion on which lake you like better? Help them with their decision.
Yeah, there's 1,300 lakes. I have a lot of choices. What I do is I ask them what they're looking for, and that's my favorite lake.
They all could be different ways, right?
My little kudos is that I've sold properties in more different lakes than any agent, so I collect lakes. But as a result, I've learned a lot about lakes. But really, everyone has their idea of what kind of lake they want. If they just want kayaks and they don't want jet skis, there's certain lakes. If they want to go boating or if they want to go water skiing, you can't use jet skis in certain lakes, and some lakes are just too small. But even small lakes, like on Long Pond, there is a competitive water skier on the lake. It's only 95 acres.
No public app.
But he put in a slalom course with bubbles that he would sink, and he would blow them up, and then he'd go full, and then because he's on the widest part of the lake, and then he'd let it go back down. So even though he had to, it's not a very big lake, but that doesn't mean that he couldn't water ski. But you have to know the rules too. There's like rules and regulations and things like that. What I like about waterfronts, and I think you do too, is it's an emotional purchase. I would be so bored if what I sold were mini split levels in some town in Nashua. Although I have sold in Nashua a split level. And because it doesn't necessarily lack the personality. You have to find the personality. I sold one, it was one of my best friends, and who I have now sold 9 properties with. He had a split level, but he lived there for 40 years. There's a story there. I made that story the story.
Meant a lot.
And so what I think, I like people to know what really makes us tick. One of my early transactions was a 55-year-old man, couldn't read or write, and the only person in his family to ever buy a house. And he was being ripped off by a lender who said, you have to pay $1,000 for a pre-approval. He didn't know. So I got him a house. And that's where first-time buyers, that personal satisfaction. One of my favorite stories, because we could tell stories all day long. My second listing was a house down the street, but they didn't know me. They said for sale by owner. They didn't know me. I've been in the business for, I think, 8 days at that point. And I just walked up to them because you're young and you know how you get listings. And I said, I'm just down the street and I'm just wondering, I knew they didn't live there. They lived in Nashua. And I said, and they're teachers. I said, so what happens if somebody comes and wants to see your house right away? We'll drive up. It's an hour away. I said, okay. Oh, you need help with that microwave? So I went out, came back with a screwdriver. They thought maybe I had a tool set in my car. No, I just lived down the street and I got a screwdriver to help them put up this microwave. And I said, literally, I'd been in the business for 8 days. And I said to them, okay, here's the deal. Why don't you drop the price, $35,000, pay me a commission, and I'll sell it. And they did.
Wow. With a straight.
Yeah, I've now done 9 transactions with them. 9. Turns out, small world. Their son dated my second cousin, something in Jaffrey. It's just they went to my aunt's house on Thanksgivings at our family, and I'm from Michigan, so it's like small world. You just run into all kinds of coincidences.
Yeah, small world. Good.
Yeah, and another person on my little private road talked about Georgian Bay. It's like Georgian Bay. That's where our family had an island up in Canada. Because I went up there as a kid. I stayed at the Lynxwilers. I said, the Lynxwilers. What chance would we find somebody on my street who went to Canada to an island 9 miles by boat to get to friends of ours, and he lives on my street? Small world.
I was such.
And you just run into that all the time.
Stuff you just can't predict.
But the thing is, I've sold the last story. I've sold 9 properties, but they were all over the place. It didn't matter. I sold their house in 2 hours away, and then I got the next door neighbor 2 hours away, because my office and your office is our car, which is why I have 40,000 miles a year or something like that. But I'm from Michigan, so fortunately it's a Tesla, so I still get paid the same mileage credit as my Ford F-250, which gets 1 mile per gallon or something like that. But that's it. Real estate is a story. And so do you have any other stories, like with a deer?
Oh my goodness. I remember talking to another agent, and for some reason, like after I hit it, so I was driving down Washington Street in Rochester, right? Heading to an appointment. And I'm
in Rochester, by the way. My restaurant's in Rochester, downtown.
I picked up there the other night. Anyway, I went down Washington Street towards Buffalo Wild Wings. I looked down for a second. I heard a ding on my phone. I looked up, and right out my left window, a deer was just coming flying across the. There's obviously side. I tried to swerve away. It went head first right in the back of my car.
Oh, it hit the back of your car?
Like the passenger, like behind the driver's door.
Oh, okay.
And about a week later, I was driving down Middle Road in Dover, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, I met another deer. I was on the way home, and it just came out of the right side where I couldn't react that fast. It just
you hit 2 deer in a week
hops.
Or something.
Yeah, and I went to swerve on the way to that one, and I clipped it right on the front end. My Volkswagen logo went flying off the car. And then I was sitting here. I can't go see this again. They're gonna think of something the first time I show up, and it's just about the connection. I showed up to my first appointment, first time I met them, and one of the first things I said was, "Wow, they got a lot of deer around here." I hit 2 the other night. Watch out. It's just about that, like I said, that connection and being able to laugh with people, but have that trust at the same time, acknowledge. Like you had said earlier, you don't have to know everything,
no,
but you can find ways to, right? Whether it's taking that extra minute to find out exactly what the answer is, or find out exactly what they're looking for, have the knowledge on. That's how you become not more knowledgeable, but as the best you can be.
So here's what I also believe. In New York City, I was the Dale Carnegie instructor, which was by accident. No, sorry, Boston. The whole Dale Carnegie is not about public speaking. It's about building confidence. And that's something I hopefully instilled in my daughter because she wanted to be a musician with her. Building confidence. But what I learned is that you talk to people and they will tell you everything. And then they hire you and you haven't said anything. In New York City, I had an interview with I was an art director, and I just asked this guy questions about himself. He never asked a single thing about me, and I got hired and doubled my salary. But people will talk, and they will talk. And the same with, I created a chocolate business called Filthy Rich Chocolate, just because I like chocolate. And I talked to, there's this magazine for the chocolate business. I knew nothing about chocolate, nothing. And so I talked to the editor. He liked my story. So he not only did a story, but gave me an ad for free. I didn't have any money. Then I got sued by the largest family-owned business in the world called Mars.
Sued you?
They sued me because I created the Love Bar, which was another, and they had Dove chocolate, and they decided to sue me as a trademark infringement. I'm going, Dove at best means peace. It doesn't mean. And I went to a big time attorney, and I said, I don't have any money, but if a company can pounce on a little guy like me over something that I know cannot possibly be a trademark infringement, that would set a bad precedent. So he took it on. I won. Now I can write a story called Attack from Mars, but I haven't done that yet. But part of what, and I think you probably do, is you're learning people and they will tell you everything. And then you're almost family already. It's not manipulation.
The less
it's
you
really...
speak, the more you teach. That's what I had to learn.
You had what?
Pretty.
Oh, let them
So
speak?
the less you speak, the more you'll hear or you'll learn, whether it's about someone, their situation.
Yeah.
If you sit there and just fire off questions, you can probably get the answers. But like you said, the more you listen, the more knowledge you'll gain.
I've been accused of talking a lot, like today. But but that is what's the fun part of doing this. Now I've been doing this for 20 years. I had no idea I was going to do this for 20 years. I had no idea I was going to do it. But I keep at it, and you really learn from clients. And I can see that you'll be very successful and that you'll have fun doing it. And maybe you'll retire. I retire every day. I wake up, I'm retired from the day before, right?
So, I appreciate that. Tell me you don't want to quit every once in a while, right?
I've never really wanted to quit, but the thing is, I do other things too. I've renovated my home. I've renovated homes. I've dealt with a lot of, because I'm in my restaurant, there's all kinds of new noises. I don't know what that one is. Like my first renovation, I had what I thought was a partner, and he did such a bad job that I had to give the house, it was a duplex, back to the bank because I couldn't sell it for liability reasons. I lost so much money, but there's too many, a renovation to have all these deficiencies is not good. Plus, it was 2008. No, you couldn't sell a duplex. It was just awful. But I went from a good commission. People don't realize when you're commission to commission, you make what you can. And my commissions dropped 92%. I had no money, but I had my little house in Northwood. And so I said, there's no way I'm going to declare bankruptcy as a real estate agent. So then you get creative. So I rented my house. I stayed in my friend's garage for 8 months and then built myself back. But the other thing I did, and I tell clients this, you're dealing with clients in bad situations, divorces, that kind of stuff. And I tell this to anybody. I say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to change all your passwords. How many passwords do we have? 1 million, right? I want you to change all your passwords to a positive affirmation. Meaning, instead of 1XJY, just do it like, I love myself. 26. Then you have to have an @ sign or something. And then I wrote a blog of people who matter in my life. It forced me to change my attitude, and I think it works for anybody because we deal with people who sometimes are selling because of bad situations, sometimes they're selling because they have to, sometimes it's a death in the family, sometimes you run into a situation. I had one where the grandfather died, the family were just awful, they leached off of him, they didn't care, they just wanted the money, and they took everything, and they didn't care. And that was sad because he was my neighbor. He was the genuine nicest man in the world, and you just are appalled that something like that could happen. But that's what makes it interesting, right? Otherwise, same thing, paperwork.
I like to look back because when I started, I didn't have a lot of jobs before, right? I think I might have had $1,200 in the bank and a car my parents paid for, right? And I was living there, so I didn't have a lot of payment, but I had a lot of money to spend, right? And I was finding out exactly the cost to be in this business. I was printing out everything at the locker, about 10 cents a piece. My first commission check, I think, after my referral fee, my mentor,
was $1.50.
So I went and I bought my first laptop, right? And my first listing, I didn't have signs. So I had to borrow a sign. I called Sundance, Sundage, like the company behind Dustin's over. I had to make me a name writer, put it in the ground. And as I got more business, I started getting all the I first started, looking back, it was just a progressive thing to get you to play.
I think that sometimes I spent the most money when I had the least, which isn't always good, but you always have to look at. I learned something from Jerry Delafina, who was the icon in advertising I worked for. Part of the storyline of Mad Men is him, and that's who I learned from. He has stories, but one is he and his partner were down to $5,000. That's it. They were going to close up shop. So they decided to have a party. They had a big party, all kinds of people, clients, and they got a huge client out of that party, and that changed everything. But that's just not being afraid. You can think about failing, or you can just be not afraid about failing, because a failing is just a step to success.
Absolutely. Love the word no.
Yep. And you just make do with what you have and never be afraid to ask for help. And clients need to not be afraid to ask for help, because they are asking for help when they're selling their house. Sometimes we have to advise them that it's $400,000 too expensive and we need it. I said, I don't care what you need. I had put an offer on a property, was over asking, and then the seller decided to increase the price $200,000. Now it's still for sale. But and you'll find, I think, if you sell a property very quickly, they think they undersold. But then
absolutely,
the answer is that no, it's priced right.
And then if it stays on the
and then it doesn't matter how many years. I had one. It was during COVID, which in itself was a crazy time. Which of course you were in the middle of all that. 275 people came to the open house. 19 offers. Now, on the upside, my wife was one taking everyone's name, and everyone gave her their contact name, even if they had an agent, because of my wife. But she's the Mai Tai of Mai Tai restaurant, by the way. I'm just the guy in the background. But that's the fun. You just never know. I had no idea. How do I do 19 offers? How do I deal with that? Sold for $100,000 over asking, and I wasn't prepared for that. And it was during COVID when his company said you could work remotely from everywhere. So they decided they're going to move to Tawas. Sold the house. And then the company says, no, you have to come in once a week. So I sold them another house. So it's a twofer. But then they made $100,000. They made money. A lot of people don't understand how much they can make. And then you're going to be building a lot of contacts of vendors and people to rely on and that kind of stuff, and ones not to rely on. And so I'm sure you use Google a lot, but they still ask you, which is good. So, well, it sounds like you enjoy what you're doing, and you need to avoid the deers. I have a Miata, a little old 94 Miata, and I hit a deer, ran right in front of me, and I hit the deer, but it's a rounded front. There was no damage. And on the Miata, it would have been the same size as a deer.
Right.
So by the way, on Route 4 in Nottingham, there was a gigantic moose running along Route 4.
A moose?
A moose. I didn't know it was a moose. I said, why is the Clydesdale running down the road? And then it turned its nose, which went right across the road. It's a moose. It was a huge, 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, they are massive.
What's that?
I said they are massive.
Massive. They're huge. You can drive under it. A lot of people will see this from all over. What is your favorite part about New Hampshire?
New Hampshire. I just think the diversity. You got the lakes, the mountains, the ocean.
All 8.5 miles of shore, but that's okay. You still have an ocean.
43% to dry. I'm a big skier, golfer. We have hiking. There's just so many different options for every single season. The summers are beautiful.
Have you done the zip line? How many times have you done the zip line?
I've done it once.
Is
Twice.
that it?
Twice. It's a different bus.
Okay, what about skydiving in Lebanon?
I have not done that.
Oh, you got to do that.
You think so? I think
during Labor Day. Labor Day, they have a 3-day thing there. It's insane.
I was talking to a life insurance guy.
Yeah, no, you don't tell life insurance that you're doing skydiving. No, I skydived the first time in college, and then I told my parents.
Do you have a blast?
In college, it was frightening because, first of all, there's a round parachute and the rectangular one. A round parachute, which is Army parachutes, they drop at 10 miles per hour and go forward 5 miles per hour. So you have to learn how to land or you break your leg. So that's what happens. You can't maneuver. Whereas the rectangular ones, you can go anywhere because it goes forward 10 miles per hour and drops 5 miles per hour, which means that you can land on your feet and you can go all over the place and that kind of stuff. In college, I wasn't attached to somebody. I just jumped out of the plane and the airplane had wires dangling and I was sitting on a milk crate. This did not seem like a professional. But the one in Lebanon, I can't remember. First of all, I made sure I wore a shirt with my logo on it. Had a video done. Seems like a write-off, but as I landed, and I took a video, which is just hilarious, and a colleague of mine says, there's only 2 things that fall out of the sky: bird doo-doo and fools. He didn't use the word doo-doo, but that was... But I recommend it. And I arrived the night before, and I had a tent, pitch a tent. It's dark. The little poles are black. I didn't have a flashlight. I'm going, how the hell am I? So I see this guy in a crutches walking by. He's got a flashlight. I say, hey, could you use your flashlight so I can put up my tent? Sure. So what do you do here? I says, I'm one of the instructors. So I'm going, what? He said, what happened to your foot? I was like, oh, I landed a little hard. I mean, this is like the night before I'm going skiing.
It landed a little hard. He shows up on crutches.
And this is the guy I'm going to... He couldn't. But I was attached to a guy going down, and it was like 14,000. It was huge. You're above all the clouds. All I can say is that if you're above everybody else, it brings new meaning to the term throw up. And then we went into a cloud. He just wanted to see what it's like to stop. I'm going, what? So we go into a cloud, you can't see anything. And then he stopped. Because you can just, and isn't this when the parachute folds back into the pack and you just free fall for, but I'll always have that memory. It's just, and in terms of skiing, I learned in a landfill, Michigan doesn't have mountains. They have they don't have mountains. And so I come here and I took my daughter to Cannon Mountain, and she's there's no gravitational pull for her. She's short and fearless and going in and out. And I said, I can't follow you. And she goes through the trees. And then she gets down to the bottom and she's playing hide and seek. I said, as a parent, I don't know if you're a parent, you don't want your kid to be playing hide and seek at a resort somewhere,
At a ski resort.
And then you don't want to see your 8-year-old kid going up the chairlift, So I learned on landfill, and she already knew how. Her mother learned on the Alps, so that's a different. And then golfing, I did the logo for Kingswood Golf Course, and they were supposed to give me lessons in trade. Instead, I got a shirt for 20% off, which I designed. And all I know is that when I started at the company, they said, what's your handicap for golf? I said, golf. I can make a bunker out of a 7-iron, no problem. If you want a bunker, just give me a 7-iron. It will be done in no time. That's my talent. But it didn't stop me from trying. I did a charity golf thing. And here's the one thing about charity golf things. They have prizes for first place, but they also have one for last place.
So you can pick and choose.
Which was a lot of balls that didn't account for the ones that were lost. So
Absolutely.
Anyway, it was really a joy. I seem to talk more, but I really sense that you really like what you're doing, which makes a difference. You're personable. Your stories, you got more stories to work on. Just, you don't need more about deer. There's turkeys. Turkeys is a good one. And I always find that it's helpful to write these stories down. Of course, my daughter wants me to write a book, and in a way, I'm doing this podcast for that. But just keep those stories fresh before you forget. Put them down, and I think with Chat GPT, you can now do it easy, right?
But no, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It was great talking to you. You have a good day and be well. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Waterfront Agent Podcast. I'll be back with some more stories, tips, and expert interviews, and hopefully some humor. So make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.